All right, let's get straight into it. We're going to break down the Naga political issue, one of the longest and most tangled conflicts in South Asia. What we're really focusing on today is the critical deadlock in the peace talks between the Indian government and the main Naga group, the NSCN-IM. We need to understand how a landmark peace deal is now teetering on the edge of complete collapse. So here's the central question, the real paradox of this whole situation. How did the 2015 Framework Agreement, which was supposed to be this groundbreaking peace accord, end up causing the critical deadlock we see today? It's a huge question, right? A deal meant to end a war is now the very thing that might restart it. Let's figure out how we got here. Okay, so first things first, let's look at the current status. It's a critical deadlock. The peace process that took decades to build is, to put it mildly, stuck in a very, very dangerous place. Just think about this for a second. We're talking about over 600 rounds of talks, decades of work, and right now, the process is completely stalled. The stakes? Well, they couldn't be higher. The NSCN-IM is making it crystal clear. If this agreement isn't honored, they're warning of renewed armed resistance. That would basically undo everything achieved since the ceasefire. So what exactly is this framework agreement that's at the heart of everything? Well, back in 2015, it was a huge deal. It was a peace pact between the Indian government and the NSCN-IM, and it did two really important things. It officially recognized the Naga's unique history, and it put this idea of shared sovereignty on the table as the way forward. That was the game changer. All right, so we know what the agreement is. Now, let's pull up a seat at the negotiating table and look at the core points of contention. And let me be clear, these aren't just minor disagreements. We're talking about fundamental clashes over the very symbols of a nation. And this table just lays it all out, doesn't it? The gap is massive. Look at the NSCN-IM's demands. These are their non-negotiables. A separate Naga national flag, a separate constitution, which they call Yazabo, and the integration of all Naga territories. Total deal breakers for them. Now look at the government's position. They're saying, okay, you can have a flag, but only for cultural events. Your constitution? Sure, but it has to be part of the Indian constitution. And integrating territories? That's a hard no. They're offering more autonomy, but absolutely refuse to redraw state lines. You can see why they're stuck. This is where it gets really interesting. The problem isn't just the demands themselves. It's how both sides are reading the original agreement. Take shared sovereignty. For the NSCN-IM, that means two separate sovereign nations working together. For the Indian government, it means a whole lot of autonomy, but still under the Indian Union. Same thing with unique history. For the Nagas, that means we were never part of India. For the government, it means we recognize you have a distinct culture. It's like they signed the same document, but are reading two completely different texts. And if you want to understand just how deep this conviction runs, just listen to this quote from Thuingaleng Muivah, the NSCN-IM's leader. The Nagas will never be part of the Indian Union nor accept its constitution. There can be no solution without our flag and our constitution. You hear that? That's not a bargaining chip. That's a line in the sand, drawn from decades of history and identity. But wait, it gets even more complicated, because this isn't just a two-sided negotiation. We have to talk about the competing claims to legitimacy within the Naga groups themselves. It's not one single voice at the table, and that changes everything. So you've got two main blocks here. On one side, there's the NSCN-IM. They see themselves as the only authentic political organization for the Nagas. They're the ones talking at the prime minister's level. But then you have the NNPGs, the Naga national political groups. This is a coalition of at least 7 other factions. And they started their own separate talks with the government, signing something called the Agreed Position in 2017. So you see the problem, right? How can you finalize a peace deal when the people you're making it with are split into rival camps?
So let's dig a little deeper into the foundation of these talks. To really get why the NSCN-IM is so rigid about the framework agreement, you have to understand the diplomatic history, what they consider the absolute non-negotiable bedrock of this entire process.
Yeah, long before 2015, the real turning point was the Amsterdam Joint Communiqué in 2002. You cannot overstate how huge this was for the NSCN-IM. It was the first time the government of India officially recognized the unique history and position of the Nagas. This wasn't just words. For them, it elevated the whole thing from a domestic rebellion to a political negotiation between two equals. It also set key rules, like talks happening at the prime ministerial level and in a neutral third country. This was the moment the game changed. So here's the bottom line. For the NSCN-IM, that 2015 framework agreement isn't just some piece of paper. It's the end result of 50 years of struggle, of bloodshed, of sacrifice. So when they feel the government is trying to water it down or renegotiate, they don't just see it as a political maneuver. They see it as a profound betrayal of everything they fought for. And that brings us to the history. Let's quickly go over the roots of this conflict. Because to really get why these feelings are so strong, you have to understand that this story begins right at the birth of modern India. Okay, check this out. August 14th, 1947. That's one day before India became independent. On that day, the Naga National Council declared Naga independence. That single act is the historical anchor for their entire movement. Now jump forward to 1975. Some Naga leaders signed the Shillong Accord, basically agreeing to give up arms. But for hardliners like Isaac Swu and Muivah, this was a total sellout. So in 1980, they break away and form the NSCN to keep fighting. It's this long, bloody history that eventually leads to the 1997 ceasefire and, years later, the 2015 agreement we're talking about now. Now we have to talk about territory. A core goal for the NSCN-IM has always been the creation of what they call Greater Nagaland. And as you can see here, this isn't just about the current state of Nagaland. They're talking about integrating Naga-inhabited lands from Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, and Assam, and even parts of Myanmar. You can imagine why this is a massive point of contention, not just for the central government, but for all the neighboring states. Okay, so let's wrap this up with a strategic outlook. What are the real risks here? And is there any path forward out of this mess? So why is this deadlock so severe? There are a few key reasons. For one, the NSCIM runs what is essentially a parallel government, the GPRN, with its own Naga army and taxation system. It's already happening. Two, the threat of going back to war isn't just talk, it's a real possibility. Three, they've started calling for a third party to mediate, which tells you trust with the Indian government is basically shot. Add to that the infighting between the Naga groups and the growing pressure from regular people, groups like the Naga Ho-Ho and Naga Mothers Association, who just want a peaceful solution, and you've got a recipe for a very volatile situation. So what could a final settlement even look like? It seems to come down to three things. First, and this is a big one, you have to get the Naga groups on the same page. Without unity between the NSCN-IM and the NPGs, any deal is built on sand. Second, both sides have to sit down and agree on what shared sovereignty actually means. And third, they've got to get creative and find a compromise on the flag and constitution, one that respects Naga identity but doesn't violate the Indian constitution. It's a tall order for sure. And that really brings us to the final choice, doesn't it? There's a fascinating quote that frames this perfectly. India is now seen not as an adversary, but as a potential partner. That says it all. The path forward is a choice between decades more of conflict or finding a way to build a real partnership. And the only way to get there, it seems, is for both sides to find a way back to the original spirit of that 2015 agreement and make it work.